All right, let's dive right into this explainer. Today, we're uncovering how a fundamental biological process, yeah, I'm talking about photosynthesis, actually serves as a profound framework for spiritual transformation. I know, you probably haven't thought about this stuff since you were frantically cramming formulas for a high school biology test. But trust me, today's source material looks at this familiar science through a totally different, honestly fascinating lens. The author argues that there's this divine pattern hidden right out in the open, literally operating inside every single green leaf on Earth, and they use it as an absolutely powerful metaphor for inner change.
You might actually remember this classic equation from those days in the lab. 6 molecules of carbon dioxide plus 6 molecules of water plus a little light yields glucose and oxygen, right? It's the elegant, simple foundation of how plants live, how massive ecosystems survive, and well, how we literally get the oxygen we breathe. But the source material for today's explainer asks us to look entirely past the ecology. The text isn't here to give us a science lesson on gas exchange. It actually uses that exchange as a map for something else entirely.
So instead of a textbook science lesson, this framework challenges us to see a pattern by asking a really profound question. What happens when a human life is placed under the influence of divine realities? Specifically, how does this framework envision God working within a human life? The author asks us to consider this fascinating parallel. How do these tangible, physical inputs mirror deeply spiritual encounters? Let's break it down.
To really grasp the metaphor, we first need to look at how these 3 crucial biological inputs come together to create life. A plant absolutely requires carbon dioxide from the air, water absorbed through its roots, and light from the sun to kickstart the whole thing. If even one of these variables is missing, the biological engine just stops. So let's look at these one by one and see exactly how the text maps these physical requirements directly to spiritual inputs. The author draws a super fascinating parallel first, mapping the quiet diffusion of carbon dioxide directly to the invisible initiating breath of God, entering a life. Think about it scientifically. Carbon dioxide makes up less than 0.1% of our atmosphere. It's incredibly sparse, yet it literally builds the physical structure of all plant life on Earth. You can't see it, you can't hold it, but it diffuses quietly into the leaf and sparks life. The text compares this directly to the biblical concept of breath, arguing that breath is never just air. It represents spirit. In this framework, it's the invisible initiating work of the divine, where something profound really begins. Moving on to the second input, we have water. Now, in a plant, water isn't just a nutrient, it's the actual medium where all these biological reactions take place. It carries the vital substances and physically enables chemical change to happen. Well, the text equates this vital fluid to living water, mapping it to the indwelling presence of Christ. The idea here is that just as physical water enables botanical change, this spiritual water is what sustains and actually enables inner transformation. It's framed not just as a quick fix, but as a permanent, abiding presence within a person.
But here's the catch. Neither breath nor water can do anything without a catalyst. Physical light is the absolute mandatory energy source for the entire mechanism. Without that photon energy from the sun hitting the leaf, the biological process literally does not begin, no matter how much water or CO2 is hanging around. According to the source, this serves as a powerful metaphor for divine revelation. In this view, light isn't just a symbol of goodness, it is the vital activation energy. The author argues it represents the truth that finally awakens and activates the human soul to start the transformation process.
So the crucial thesis of this whole framework is that when these 3 elements converge, it goes way beyond just modifying external behavior. The author argues that it sparks an irreversible transformation at the very core of a person. The concept is that the Spirit enters, the life of Christ fills, and the revelation of God activates. And just like inside the microscopic cellular walls of a leaf, a core internal change begins that fundamentally alters the organism. We're not talking about surface-level tweaks or some 5-step self-improvement program here. The source is describing an absolute fundamental transformation at the structural level.
Okay, but the entire point of photosynthesis isn't simply to absorb elements from the environment, right? It's designed to manufacture something entirely new. It takes those raw materials and builds something sustaining. So the source shifts its focus here from the inputs we've just talked about over to the spiritual outputs. It asks, if those are the elements brought into a life, what exactly is produced as a result?
Well, in this symbolic framing, the first product, glucose, represents organized, functional life. Scientifically, glucose is a stored, highly structured form of energy. It's the literal foundation for a plant's growth, its stability, and its ability to bear fruit. Spiritually, the author equates this to Christ being formed within a person. It's described as a stable, sustaining inner strength, rather than just a fleeting burst of emotion or temporary inspiration. According to the text, it's this concept of a new creation taking actual substantial shape inside of an individual.
And then we have the byproduct. It's a well-known biological reality that plants act as the lungs of the earth. They produce oxygen for their own cellular respiration, but critically, they produce vastly more than they actually need, releasing that massive excess out into the atmosphere. The text uses this natural overflow to illustrate a key spiritual reality. The author suggests that the ongoing life of God is meant to sustain you internally while simultaneously becoming breath for the world around you. You're sustained by it, and out of that abundance, the people around you are blessed by it. How cool is that?
Bringing all these elements together really reveals a remarkably cohesive symmetry in the author's framework. When you synthesize the scientific elements with their proposed spiritual counterparts, you can see how methodically the metaphor maps out. From the carbon dioxide and breath imparting life, to the light and revelation acting as the catalyst, all the way down to the oxygen resulting in a tangible blessing to others. The author has essentially mapped a closed-loop system of divine grace right onto the foundational ecology of our planet. It creates a seriously compelling lens for understanding spiritual growth.
But wait, the author introduces one more deeply fascinating detail to this biological framework. It's this hidden, quieter layer that we honestly usually overlook when we talk about growth and energy. It brings up a very practical question. What happens when the sun goes down? What happens to this entire intricate system when the light is suddenly gone?
You see, during the night cycle, there is no active light. Photosynthesis simply stops entirely. Yet the plant doesn't die. Why? Because it shifts to rely entirely on the stored glucose and oxygen it produced during the daylight hours. The source draws a profound symbolic conclusion from this. The author proposes that during dark seasons, when a person isn't actively feeling the warmth of the light or visibly producing outward results, their spiritual survival doesn't depend on constant external output. Instead, it relies entirely on the internal transformation that has already been formed within them during the light. The organism is sustained by what is deeply stored.
Ultimately, the author points every single piece of this elaborate pattern directly back to Jesus, framing him as both the initiator and the final product of the entire process. In this theological view, he is the breath that is given to start the process. He is the water that sustains the environment. He is the light that reveals the truth. And the framework concludes that the incredible result of all these converging inputs is that he actually produces himself within the individual.
As we wrap up this explainer, consider this summarizing quote directly from the text. Christ becomes your life, and your life becomes a source of life. This source leaves us with a highly compelling thought regarding this entire framework. If this quiet, persistent transformation is indeed taking place, much like a leaf quietly producing oxygen under the sun, who in your world is currently waiting to breathe in the overflowing life you are meant to provide? Keep learning, keep growing, and I'll catch you in the next explainer.